Hi, I'm Mark Hovey, producing artistic director at Paper Mill Playhouse, and welcome to Babbling by the Brook. I'm so excited. We have an incredible guest today. He is a 3-time Tony Award winner for Bandstand, In the Heights, and of course, Hamilton. My good friend, Andy Blankenbuehler. Hey, Andy, how are you?
I'm going great today, thanks.
It is so good to see you. I can't believe it. It's been quite a while.
I know, it's interesting. We've all been in this world where we're in our private places and we reach out to people when we can, and we've talked on the phone, but finally get to see each other face to face.
I know. And before we get into the professional stuff, I just want to talk a little bit because I feel like we have known each other for such a long time.
This summer will be 30 years.
Oh, is that right?
30. Yeah, I moved to New York City in August of 1990 for the chorus line audition where I met you at.
Right, we met. I'll never forget this. We met at Radio City Music Hall.
In the hallway, yeah.
In the hallway, we were both auditioning for I don't know if the Broadway company had just closed.
They had just closed.
And they were going to send out a big national tour, the Broadway Tour of America. And I remember feeling a little lost, and I guess you kind of had a little, deer in the headlights look too, and we sort of...
I knew no one in New York City.
And we kind of connected there and spent a fair part of that day together.
Yeah.
That was a crazy audition.
Such a small world, right? How things just come around. And
it is. And what's so funny about that, you and I at that time, I mean, I'm many years older than you, but we were dancers in New York. You had just arrived, and I had been there for a couple of years, making our way, just trying to, stake our claim somewhere in New York, and not knowing where the crazy journey would lead us, or that we would ever see each other again. Right? There were hundreds of people in that audition. Situation.
That was like a real New York audition too. Like that's the kind of audition I grew up thinking I would have one day when I became a Broadway dancer. And like it was just hundreds of people and so many good people.
Well, and it was crazy because they were casting for the tour of Chorus Line, and everybody had done the show, had done a national tour, an international tour, some production, and I had done it like in summer style. I'd done it in regional theater, and everybody seemed to know everything, and I felt so lost. And we walked in the room, and they weren't even like teaching steps. People just did the choreography. And I remember going in that little side studio with you and a bunch of people to try to learn that tap combination. Yeah. And then going in and auditioning.
It's so funny. And you know what? I don't know if you know this, but then, then you and I finally worked together with Guys and Dolls. We met in Toronto. But that same year that I moved to New York City, I got my equity card doing a chorus line with Robbie Marshall at the Westchester Broadway Dinner Theater.
Wow.
And so that became sort of my first professional job in New York City. And it introduced me to Rob Marshall. And then I stayed in his circles for a few years because I worked with Kathleen a lot. And then she introduced me to Scott Ellis, who introduced me to Susan Stroman. So it like really got my first 5 years in New York City spinning that first production of Chorus Line.
And I have to tell you, and Robbie's a great guy because I worked with him too. I auditioned for him a couple times and then finally worked with him on Victor Victoria. And he's very loyal to the people that he's really caring and just a great, terrific artist.
Great people work with him. Great people like Joey Peasies of the world. And there's not very many of them.
Yeah. Interesting, because not long after that, though, you came still as a dancer to Paper Mill. What year was West Side Story?
Well, West Side was 1992. And that was a huge mile marker for me because I was playing Baby John in West Side, which I had really wanted to do. I had never done it, and I wanted to do it with Alan Johnson. And on a lunch break, I don't know if you know the story, but on a lunch break at 890 Broadway, there was a final callback for the Broadway revival of Most Happy Fella out of Goodspeed that Liza Gennaro was doing. And I ran upstairs on my lunch break just as the last group was coming out. I missed the audition. And Liza Gennaro looked at me and she was like, I have a good feeling about you. She brought me into the room. She gave me a private audition and I booked the job. And then I went back to Paper Mill, and Paper Mill said, it's up to Alan Johnson if he's going to let you out of the contract or not. So Alan Johnson said no. He said in a very flattering way, he said, you're too good in this show to go be in the ensemble of that show. Like you need to do West Side Story while you can. And then ironically, I got hurt doing West Side Story. And so I was at the Paper Mill Playhouse. And I remember really specifically, because it was a major moment in my life, being in the green room at Paper Mill, icing my knee, like in the second act or intermission or whatever it was, because I tore cartilage in my knee. And I was writing in my journal about the Somewhere Ballet. And I was like reinterpreting it in the way I was viewing the choreography. And so cut to many years later, I use my reinterpretation of the Somewhere Ballet in every musical that I do. So like, those arms, that's just like my country, I'm young. Like every show does that scherzo step.
And it was in Bandstand too.
It was in Bandstand. It's been every show I've ever done. It was in the Heights, 9 to 5, because that moment sitting in the green room at the Paper Mill Playhouse was so informative to me, because I wasn't able to do, because of my injury, what I wanted to do. So I forced my brain to figure out why it was so important. And so my brain at the early age took sort of precedent over my body. And I think it was inevitable after that I was going to become a choreographer.
And that's crazy, because you and I both started as dancers and then became choreographers, directors, and then we went different ways. You became, one of the new faces of musical theater in the world. And I run a little theater. No, but it's funny, because then our paths crossed again. We in Guys and Dolls, and I remember you were doing the national tour, but you also did the Broadway production, right?
I did the Broadway production after the national tour.
Right. And I remember the national tour, and that was toward the end of my dancing career, and I was in my 30s, and I'll never forget this day. And I rehearsed at the Kennedy Center in the basement, and then when I had my put-in, I had to dance on stage the Crapshooters Ballet, an amazing Chris Chadman athletic choreography, right between you and Jeffrey Schechter. And Jeffrey was like
so funny,
18, and you were 20-something. And I thought, here I was in my 30s, and he made me work. But we reconnected there and spent a few months on the road. That was exciting. And then I came to Paper Mill, and you came here as a choreographer in a new stage of your career. Red Hot and Blue.
Red Hot and Blue first, and then very quickly with It's a Wonderful Life.
Right, which was great. That was a spectacular production. And your contributions to that, I remember the staging was really key. And it was so fascinating for me to watch you discovering yourself as a young choreographer then. Red Hot and Blue was this Cole Porter review, and then you came back. I think it was only like a year or so later, season or so later.
It's interesting how our careers work, that we work so hard for opportunities, and then it's a desert, and then it's a rainstorm. Because what happened during It's Wonderful Life, and everyone was so sweet to be flexible with me, I was offered my first Broadway show as a choreographer at the same time, at the last second. So I rehearsed the show, but then left it with my assistants to sort of run it through tech. And I started rehearsals for the Apple Tree on Broadway, and then just sort of went back and forth. And that sort of became like a recurring motif for my choreography career, that like two things would always happen at the same time. And interestingly, I overanalyze everything. I think that busyness forces me to trust my instincts in a way that says, I don't have time to do this 10 times, do it the best way once. And when I really let go, I think my instincts are their most prime. When I overanalyze, it gets ugly. Like then we did Bandstand. One of my favorite Bandstand stories is this show was beautiful to do, and we made lots of changes on the way, and then it got filmed and it was released in the movie theaters. And my son was sitting next to me in the movie theater when we watched it. And during one of the numbers, a lyric came on. And in the middle of that lyric, he elbows me really hard. And I was like, what? He goes, you remember it took you 8 counts to figure that one lyric out? And it was true. For 8 straight hours, I played the same 8 counts of music. And I choreographed all these different versions of it. And finally, he had just had enough because I work at home. And he came into the dance studio and he was like, Dad, what is going on? And I was like, I can't figure out what's the best version. He's, show me what you've got. And he sits back down and I show him 3 versions. And he goes, Dad, they all work. And he walked out of the room.
That is so funny. I love your interpretation of that. My interpretation of it is that I'm a procrastinator and I wait till the very last minute when time's run out, and then I have to trust my instincts. You're right that our lives become so complicated, and as artists, following projects and trying to cobble together our lives and careers, you never have enough prep time, right?
Yeah.
You never have enough time to say, well, I'm going to spend the next 6 weeks only thinking about this project and working on it. You're constantly running out of time, and I think sometimes that's when you have to be creative, right?
Yeah.
You become the most creative.
When you run up against a parameter. And the other way to simplify that process is I always had directorial instincts about me, but now that I'm directing and choreographing, the good news is my work with writers leads me to a blueprint that I want to choreograph. Many times when I am just choreographing and I receive the blueprint, I'll be like, A doesn't connect to C. What happens in B? But now when I'm in charge, a year before I'm starting to choreograph, I'm already putting the pieces in place so that they instinctivly make sense to me as a choreographer. And then the choreography tends to happen much more quickly. But you're right, like this morning, I ride in the morning before I start to dance, and I was on the bicycle. And on my 30-minute bicycle ride, I stopped 3 times to pull up my phone to take notes, because I had the same song on loop for the 30 minutes. And I started to figure out ideas and literally had to pull off the road, type on my phone. But you're right, there's never enough time, and you just have to take the ideas while you get them.
And it's funny too, because you and I both did that same thing where you started as a choreographer and then moved into the directing chair. And I was always frustrated as a choreographer because steps don't come out of my feet very quickly. I would drive your son crazy. I'd be up all night agonizing over 8 counts.
Yeah.
I'm jealous of those choreographers who you say that doesn't quite work, and they go into a studio and come back 2 hours later with a whole new number. But and it was about somebody, a producer I worked with, finally said, well, you know why you're frustrated as a choreographer? You think like a director. So you see the bigger picture. And I saw that with you too early on in how you structured numbers, that you directed the choreography. And so it's a freeing thing when you can be in control of all. Not every artist can make that leap, but it must be, and it's certainly where you are now, creating new projects. That must be an exciting thing.
It's really exciting. And I'm very blessed in my life and in my career to have a lot of flexibility with the projects that I do. And I'm finding now that the shows that are on my lap are really dear to me, and they're about subject matter that really, really speaks to me. And so that makes my daily life more enjoyable. But also, we are chameleons in our craft. We have to be a juggler and a tap dancer and a fire baton twirler. And it's nice to actually trust the fewer things, the niche things that you do. Right. And so of late, like I've been working with musical styles that really feel right to me and feel good to me. And I still take chances. And like I'm working on a piece right now that's set in Italy in the 40s. And so the music is like this classical Italian feel. So it has much more sweeping balletic gestures than I usually do. So it's like the palette cleaner for the tension of the other things that I do, like 5 points and Only Gold, these things that are coming down the pipe for me that are really tense and really syncopated. But those syncopations come out really naturally to me. So it's nice to feel like I can relax into my comfort zone a bit.
Yeah. And I do want to talk about 5 points, especially in Only Gold, but I want to talk about a couple things. I want to talk about Bandstand, which was such an incredible project for us. So many people at the theater still talk about it. It was one of my son's favorite shows ever. And just a little bit about that project for you.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, it was a really wonderful way that it came to me, because it came to me from people that I met even before I met you. Like I started playing soccer on the soccer team with David Kreppel, who was the music director of Bandstand at Paper Mill. We went to first grade together. We went to school from first grade through high school, then went our own 2 separate ways, and then they came back in show business again. But we also I met this guy, Richard Obracker, who wrote the music for the show. Richard and I did a summer theater camp together when I was 16 years old. And so
was it a soccer camp?
No, soccer theater camp. So to get a phone call from them after all these years to say, hey, this is the right fit for us, let's do this together, was awesome. Like the sense of community within our very tough business is great when the community comes back around. I love the 40s. I love the fashion. I love the people. I love the human stories. I love the sort of HD Norman Rockwell reality of it, where the details are so specific. And the other reason I like it in hindsight, Bandstand, is because it was a tremendous process of learning and growing. Like the show changed dramatically from first reading to second reading to third reading to workshop to paper mill. I mean, I will always tell the story that in one preview rehearsal at paper mill, we cut 22 minutes off of the show.
I talk about that all the time. I say that all the time in those, I'm working on new projects and getting them on their feet and saying, you look at it, and many people get frozen in that moment of not wanting to change too much, afraid. And I always talk about how brave you and that team were to say, these are issues and we need to cut, change, rewrite. Correct. I remember that it was a Tuesday afternoon. It's like 22 minutes out of the show, all for the good, all for the better. Huge.
If we hadn't made that change, the show never would have gone to Broadway.
I agree. Yeah.
And it's interesting because we never stop learning. I just turned 50 years old and the lessons just keep coming. There was beautiful things about Bandstand at Paper Mill, but like some of the things I learned, like for example, it was a human story. And so if scenery is moving by itself, it takes the human element out of the story.
Right.
And so probably one of the most beautiful moments on Broadway was when all the soldiers pushed Donnie Nowitzki's piano across the stage. And that wasn't in the show at Paper Mill.
Right.
And so Paper Mill enabled me to learn that, yes, this worked fine, but sometimes taking something like technology out of the picture to remind ourselves that theater is live and it's about the humans in front of us was a huge learning thing for me. And we were blessed because Paper Mill is a great theater and it's a great place and it's so close that the talent involved is always so good that it lets you play in the sandbox of A-list people. And so in that way, you can be brave. You can go in on a Tuesday and say, listen, you're going to sing the song backwards on your head. Let's do this. I'm going to give you 2 hours to practice it. And, you know, people, the other thing I learned about Bandstand as a director is people love a leader with a vision. It doesn't matter if your vision runs you into a wall eventually, but to be able to lean into it, everybody loves it and they get behind it. And when you have that kind of momentum and trust, then you can make changes. Then you can change your game plan because you know where you're heading and you're all heading there together.
And everybody's on board with you. I think that's right. That's one of the things I learned as a young director was make a decision. You can always change your mind, but be direct, make the decision, and people will trust you. That was the other thing about trust too. I said, I remember seeing the first reading of that show, or one of the early ones, and you calling me and saying, I want you to see this, but it's not ready. I'm telling you, I want you to see it. And it's before the reading where the guys actually played instruments.
Yeah.
You know, and then you said, come back. I'm ready now, come back. And I saw it again. Rarely do I go see something twice. But I trusted you, and then I was 100% on board, and I called Tom Smith, our commercial producer, hours afterwards, and I said, we've got to work on this show. I love it. Let's do it. So that was thrilling and exciting. And we have to talk a little bit about Hamilton. Just, you know, it's an amazing piece of American and musical theater history. And I know you could talk for hours about it, but just talk to us a little bit about that whole process for you and working with Tommy and your, you know.
Yeah, I mean, the whole thing was amazing. I mean, the first step of Hamilton is always what our first step should be, trusting history and just starting from scratch. So we all met on In the Heights. And we did good work on In the Heights, and In the Heights was an homage in many ways to shows like Fiddler. I mean, it is the same story as Fiddler, about things that existed, learning from the past, and then having the boldness to say them in your own way. We were never a group that wanted to disregard the way things had been done. We worshiped the musical theater. And then we just happened to have voices that were bold. So we learned a lot, and we learned a lot about camaraderie and partnership at In the Heights. I learned a lot about authenticity and preparation at In the Heights, because there was so much I had to learn stylistically to choreograph that show that it taught me a whole new work ethic about discipline. And then we all went in slightly separate ways, cross-pollinating each other. We did The Wiz, which had good and bad things about it. We did Bring It On together, which had good and bad things about it. We tagged, and then we all came back together at Hamilton. And, you know, first time I really sat through Hamilton was at the Jazz at Lincoln Center. They played like 10 songs, famous night, and that it was, I mean, the city blew up. It was an unbelievable experience. And I knew instantly that it was going to be something really special. And they didn't even know yet it was going to be a show. They didn't know if it was going to be a film or an album or what it was. And then about 6 months later, it started happening. And I listened to the music quite a lot because I was overwhelmed by it. I never read Ron Charnel's book. I never enjoyed American history. And so to me, like, I couldn't even keep the pieces or the people straight in my head. And I was a little overwhelmed by 2.5 hours of 24,000 lyrics and a lot of hip hop. And so I was teching a show out of town and in New Haven, and every morning I would listen to the reading from beginning to end, beginning to end, beginning to end. And slowly I started grabbing ideas. This whole number is just boots. This whole number is just redcoats. This whole number has guns. And I'd make notes, and my outline of the show would start growing. Because when I start working, I write things in paragraph form and an outline form. And so before I ever start choreographing, I write it like a short story, basically. So I listened to it constantly, and then some of the pieces started speaking to me, and then I just dove in. And it was a long choreographic process, but people say to me all the time, "Oh my God, it must have been so hard to choreograph Hamilton." And I'm like, it was not that hard to choreograph Hamilton because the work was so inspired. Lynn and Tommy and Alex's work was so inspired that usually you make a new show and you replace 30% of the numbers. You cut characters, you change characters. And as a choreographer, you choreograph a lot of numbers that get cut. You take a C number, you turn it into a B plus number, and then it still gets cut in previews. And with our whole life, I think 27 songs were cut from In the Heights.
Oh my gosh. That's that's 2 other shows.
Yeah. At Hamilton, once we started working, we only cut 1 song.
Wow.
And so in that way, I would put on a song like My Shot, and I would have 10 great ideas. And I'd be like, which of these 10 should I grab? The other thing that was really miraculous about Hamilton is, and maybe the reason it's so appealing to people, is that it touches on such core moments of humanity. Wedding, love at first sight, death of a child, like this fight song, these huge iconic canons in our life. And as a man who lives, I think I live very colorfully. Like, I have a very rich family life, a very rich life that involves my emotions. I have made a study of humanity for 50 years. And so Hamilton gave me the opportunity to employ what I know as a person and then figure out how to choreograph that, as opposed to many times we do a musical and it's like you're choreographing dance steps, you're choreographing dances. Right. There was never we were never choreographing dances at Hamilton. We were making real life, really heightened, extreme life come to life. Right. And in that way, it was really fulfilling. And you know, it was hard, you know, and I'm method actory. And so like I grew my lamb chops. I wore boots for like 6 straight months. I was angry and dark. I was like a Sons of Liberty, like in a trench for like 6 months. But it was really, really great. And my family was going through a lot of hardship at the time. My daughter had cancer at the time. And so we lived this battle where every inch of our life was the battle. And every inch of our life saw a window of opportunity to say, that's where we're going to go and that's how we're going to win. And it was a great feeling of accomplishment, period, making it through those years. And then I'll just say, in finality, we've had so many amazing nights at Hamilton. Like, I'm so thankful for the gifts that it's given me. Like, we had this huge outdoor party opening night in LA. My son and I were dressed in white suits, and Paula Abdul came and grabbed us. And like things like that, I never would have guessed would have happened to me.
Not to mention the Kennedy Center honors.
Come on, you want to see it? I'll go grab it.
Please.
Hamilton?
Yeah. Amazing. I mean, yeah. Amazing.
I mean, it was, first of all, I was so confused. It was so confusing. I was at a restaurant with my daughter. Jeffrey Seller calls me. We're in New York City that summer. And he's like, this is weird news, but I want to tell you, you're getting Kennedy Center honor. And I was like, I was so confused because like people usually get like lifetime achievement at the end of their career.
Exactly.
It made me really confused. But everything about that weekend was tremendous. You know, most people at the Kennedy Center honors, they're older. And so they don't get to share it with their parents.
Right.
Who got them there. And so I shared it with my parents and my children. And so it was amazing. It was an amazing weekend. But the last thing I was going to say about Hamilton is that it taught us all of us, but me, what the bar can be. And it reminds us that you have to keep shooting for it. And you're going to fail most of the time. Like when you shoot to reach people and grab people and shake people, there's going to be a lot of times where you're not going to be successful, but you have to taste that quality of work and shoot for it all the time. And that leads to many more torturous hours in the dance studio behind me now, where I'm doing the same 4 counts for 8 hours again. But
I'm glad to hear you do that too, because that was my life as a choreographer. But I have to say, I mean, it must be satisfying in some sense to know that you have created this piece that lives on far beyond you and your team, and has made a mark in the world of musical theater, but just also in American history, and
it's
touched so many people. That's incredible.
It's interesting that we're talking about this right now, because this morning I choreographed a new piece from Hamilton, the first new thing I've done from Hamilton in 6 years. I took a cut song of Lynn's, and I started choreographing it today because I think it's important to put into the world as a statement for the Black Lives Matter movement. And to revisit Hamilton work, even though it was removed from the show, to recognize that Hamilton created a conversation to have new open eyes and open arms to ethnic minorities, to people who don't usually have opportunity.
Right.
That's a privilege to us to be given that responsibility. And so it's interesting how Hamilton keeps doing that. It keeps engaging a conversation. And so it's thrilling that the show is going around the world now, because it does reach a lot of people.
And will continue to do so. And the next project I wanted to talk about, you can talk about Only Gold at the end. Just I'm selfishly talking about projects that we're working on, is 5 Points. Because again, I remember it was not so long ago, a year ago, not even a year ago, that you called me up and you said, I'm working on this project. I really think it's important these artists have a voice, and I'd love to explore it with you and with Paper Mill. And I said, yes, send me the script, send me the things. And then we did that reading, and I'm so excited about it. So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, in short, 5 Points is about, it follows the life of an African-American immigrant to New York City from the South, a young boy named Willie, and an Irish immigrant named John Diamond, from an Irish single father. And it sort of follows their challenges, their father-son lessons that they're learning about pulling your family forward, making opportunity happen for them, the immigrant struggle. And it's all set in 5 Points Manhattan during the Civil War draft. It reaches a steaming head during the race riots of the draft, where John Diamond, the Irish immigrant, gets drafted and finds himself in the middle of this rioting situation where all these cultures are exploding off of each other. It's a very combustive world. It's a world that's teetering on the edge of imploding. Mm-hmm. Everything is breaking. The houses are shifting. Like, it's a world where the immigrant struggle feels like you might not have tomorrow. It's like a make or break time. And so that percussiveness finds its way in the show with a lot of tap dancing, a lot of like stomp meets tap dancing. And it sort of, in our own way, talks about sort of the birth of American tap dance in following a very famous historical figure named Master Juba, who P.T. Barnum discovers. And what happens in 5 Points is the Irish immigrant ends up being put in a tap battle against the Black immigrant by P.T. Barnum. And so these two cultures crash together in what we like to think of as like America's first dance battle. So it's a beautiful story. It's a beautiful story about fighting for the things that you know are important. It's a beautiful story about saying we're from two different places and we crash together, but we have to find our way together. And then finally, it's a story about fathers and sons, which I find really exciting. And so I'm just about to start choreographing that. We've been working on the book for about a year and a half, and the music is outrageously good, and it's getting better and better. And it's interesting, you know, with the stuff that's been going on with the riots. I worked a little bit this week on a vibe for the riot in the show, and it's interesting how life really is in our art all the time, and how our art, not unlike Bandstand, can really serve as therapy for the soul and serve as inspiration for the soul. And I think it's a great thing to remind the audience, yes, the battle is real. Life is hard, but on the other side of hardship is victory. it's the things you dream about. And I think I know I have a responsibility for paying that message to the audience, that the payoff is out there, that you should not stop dreaming, because even though it's going to be hard getting there, you will be able to get there. So in that way, like, I'm not interested in tragedies. I'm not interested in dysfunction. I'm interested in pushing through dysfunction to get to prosperity.
Yeah.
And we need that right now.
Yeah, I think we always need that. You always need a dream, and you need a light at the end of the tunnel. I love this show too. I love it because I also love that the ending is not clean. Do you know what I mean? Everyone struggles, everyone wins, and everybody loses something. And like you said,
It's real.
Yeah, it's totally real. And it's a story about families and fathers and sons, and how they, broken relationships can be mended with enough work, but that doesn't mean it's all great and everybody's happy. There's loss, there's grieving, and there's things to celebrate. It's real life.
The other thing that I love, I was teaching a master class recently, during our Zoom period of life in the past couple of months. I did a lot of master classes with colleges who are all stuck at home. And I talked a lot about how when something is classic, it keeps being classic.
Yeah.
Like when something is real, it doesn't end, it keeps going. And so I love, like Hamilton, at 5 points, it's a story that takes place in 1860, but the music is anachronistic because the story ideas are still happening now.
Right.
And so I think it's great for an audience member to sit there and see themselves on stage, even though it's 250 years ago or whatever it is.
There's a good side and a bad side to that, which is that history repeats itself, right? But in good and bad ways. As we've made our way through battles before, we will continue to do that. And I do think what is so strong about 5 points is that the message we always hope gets across is that when you're working from a place of love, that's when you find healing and success and
yeah. I don't know. I mentioned before about Bandstand, about Norman Rockwell. And I remember I went to the Norman Rockwell Museum in the Berkshires with my wife a few years ago. And I find his paintings beautiful. But when I said HD, like sometimes you think of things in the past being glossed over, like the oil paintings of George Washington. But you look at like a Norman Rockwell painting, like there is stress in those paintings. Yeah. Those men coming home from the war, their faces are worn down. And I remember staring at the hands of a man in the painting, and there was such labor to his hands, but there was such victory to his soul. And I think that that's important to show, because that's how we feel in life. Like our life is hard, but we want to believe. And so I think that that happened to the greatest generation, that happened in the 60s, that happened now. And so
like you said, it continues happening, it continues.
Yeah.
And talk to us a little bit about Only Gold.
Only Gold is the most crazy show that there ever was. And it's either going to be absolutely amazing or it's going to... No, it's a beautiful show. It's about a king who goes to Paris in the 20s. It's completely anachronistic. And in short, it's about a man who has everything, an accomplished politician. He has all these wives. He has a huge golden kingdom. And he has to learn that at this point in his life, in middle age, that none of those things actually satisfy him. And so the only thing that satisfies him is this simple relationship with him and his first wife. And he didn't need everything else. He didn't need everything that his forefathers told him he needed. The houses, the kingdoms, the towers, the swords, the wives, the jewels. And so it's about jewelry, it's about fashion, and it's about the glamorous, heartfelt, passionate world of Paris, where Paris teaches this person that basically less is more, that it's okay to love one simple thing, because one simple thing can set us free. And so I think it's an important lesson also in our world where it's more, yes, to realize that we don't need the more, that it's okay to be content with a small thing.
Yeah. And I think, listen, I'm a few years ahead of you, but as you get to this age, and we are both family men with kids and life partners and all of that, you tend to focus on what's really important, which is, love, having people around you that love and support you, having work that you love, being able to, pour your soul into something, and to work with people you love, that really is what's important. The money, the trappings we get, everyone gets caught up in that. And, I don't know who said it, but you can't take it with you, right? It's only about the love in the moment that you are living.
Yeah. So it's a beautiful show. So we're supposed to do off Broadway in the fall of 21. So hopefully the world gets back to normal and we can do that. It's basically a ballet. So it's narrated, but it's like 2.5 hours of dance. So it's probably the biggest dance thing I've ever done. It's not a ballet, like they're not going to do ballet, but it's just like a dance theater piece that never stops.
Well, I'm excited to see it. Andy, I can't thank you enough for spending this time with me. It is so great to see you, even via Zoom. Give a kiss to your lovely wife and your beautiful kids. And
we've been so good. My wife and kids have an orthodontist appointment, and we have a new puppy, and he's been sleeping at my foot the whole time. Like, I was so sure he was going to disrupt us.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Is that a cockapoo Labradoodle? What is it?
This is a Labradoodle.
Yep. Beautiful. And her name is?
Cooper.
Cooper. Beautiful. Another family member. Anyway, more to love, and take care.
Thanks. Talk soon.
I love you. Talk to you soon. Bye.
You too.
Thanks so much for joining us today. Come back next week when we talk with Broadway's animal trainer, Bill Verlone.